welcome to week 7. If I seem more excited than usual, that's because I am. I spoke with Mr. McNichol this morning. He's the supervisor, kind of like a vice principal, and I told him how I wanted you guys to be able to teach lessons to each other, and you all, well, a lot of you were like, I don't want to record myself, and admittedly, I didn't want you to have to record your lessons either, and so he has given me permission as we continue with this plan B. If we keep the schedule as it is, on Wednesdays when you guys are in my classroom twice a day, or you're always in my classroom, but when I'm in the classroom with you twice a day, he said we can bring those of you who are with Miss Reynolds into the class and you guys can teach. So I'm thinking maybe a month or a month and a half from now, we're going to start scheduling you guys to teach your lessons. And I'm super excited about that because I've been really kind of stressed out about how we're going to give you all an opportunity to teach these different grade levels. So we need to get moving on these lesson plans. I spent the last few weeks on learning objectives and standards, and I really just wanted to give you guys some familiarity with that to help with your lesson planning. And so this week, we're going to focus on another really important and really fun portion of our lesson planning. Do you know where Captain Hook buys his hook? The secondhand store.
That's a first. Captain Hook. What do you think his name was before he got that hook? Captain Nothing Out of the Ordinary? Captain TBD? TB who? Or maybe his name was Captain Pan. And he's Peter Pan's father. Ooh, and Cap Hook's running around all like, hey, Pan, I am your father. Oh, that's good.
If you didn't catch it from my clues, this week we're looking at the hook. You've probably looked at the hook in writing. It's often the first sentence or the first paragraph, and it's what grabs your reader's attention and engages them from the beginning. In a graduation speech, for instance, the speakers will often start with a funny or inspirational quote.
Look at all these beautiful faces and iPhones.
Before I begin today, they asked me to make a standard announcement. You've heard this before. About silencing your phones. So those of you with an iPhone, just place it in silent mode. If you don't have an iPhone, please pass it to the center aisle. Apple has a world-class recycling program.
It's a pleasure to be addressed. In the 19th century, this was among the first Southern schools to teach biology in a lab. Before then, you weren't supposed to learn biology until marriage.
So, like in a speech, the beginning of your class or your hook could be a simple joke or a simple song. In the beginning of the school year, when I am covering more of the historical aspect of American government, I will often have a Hamilton song playing when students walk in. I don't even always address it, but it's just kind of a way to let students know what they're in for with that class period or that lesson that day. Now, other times you might want to get students up and moving or learning in a different way. So later on in the school year in American government, we talk about the 12th Amendment, which separates the vote for president and vice president. It makes it so that when candidates run for office, they have a vice president already picked out. Prior to this amendment, whoever got first place would be president and whoever got second place would be vice president. Taking it back to 2016, that would mean that our president and vice president would be Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So sometimes saying something like that, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, can you even imagine? That's my hook. But other times I try to get students more involved. So the election of 1800 is what led to the 12th Amendment. And in the election of 1800, it ended in a tie. Thomas Jefferson ends up going on to become president, but it caused some drama between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. And a few years later, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr had a duel and Alexander Hamilton was killed. So for the past few years, when I start that lesson, I actually start when students walk in, there is a list of the duel rules hanging up on my front screen or written on my front screen. And so it tells students that in a duel, they cannot happen on Sundays, you cannot shoot at the head. And I just go over what the rules of the duel were. Then I bring two students up to the front and I have them act it out. So I tell them which one's going to be Hamilton and which one's going to be Burr. And I give them instructions on how they're meant to act. So they sit down and the lesson continues. Now, my point in that, or my learning objective, is not for students to be able to explain a duel, but students get kind of into it, right? So instead of coming to class and putting their head down, they come to class and they're like, what is going on? And they're a little bit more excited for what they're going to learn. Also, when they look back on this lesson, maybe they're going to forget that the 12th Amendment separated the vote for president or vice president, but they might remember the duel that they got to witness. By the way, I should probably mention, I don't have them actually duel. There's no guns or arrows involved. They just throw paper balls. All right, I've already mentioned that hooks can be something really short, really simple. It can be something that's just playing when students walk in. I also have to mention that you don't need to use a hook with every lesson. But let me give you a few more examples. All right, the first one is feely bags or feely boxes. So in this, you're trying to engage your students' senses by filling a small bag or a small box with objects, smells, or maybe even taste from a certain location. Some are easier to capture than others. The beach is a really good example of something that you could maybe put into a box or a bag. As I'm recording this, I'm realizing this probably wouldn't work right now during COVID, but consider the following. In a feely box or bag, you could have students work in small groups so that they could take turns and then discuss it. You could have them describe verbally or in writing what the items in each box felt like. You can have them write a sentence for each adjective. And so it's something that they can do in multiple formats, and it's a good way to get them a little bit excited about what you're going to be discussing that day. The next one is conducting a survey or creating a graph. So in the beginning of the school year, sometimes I'll have Post-its on students' desk, and when they walk in, I have them write a sentence, government is, and they can write whatever they want to write. After they've had a minute to write what government is, I have them stand up and go to the back of the room and paste their Post-it next to a positive or a negative. And so then when they sit back down, we can look back and see, all right, so this many of you think government is a positive thing, this many of you think government is a negative thing. Not only does it get students ready for what they're going to learn, but it's something I can reference back throughout the period, and I actually reference it back throughout most of the school year. You could survey your class on when their birthday is. Students get really excited to share that. This example that I'm showing surveys students on where they were born, or maybe you survey where they vacationed. All right, the next one is a museum walk. So in a museum walk, you're going to display different artifacts or posters, and you have the students walk and observe them as if they were at a museum. You could have students with Post-it notes put their thoughts on each of the items or each of the displays. You could have, I have clipboards, and so you can have students walk around and record their notes or answer questions with the clipboard. I like that because it gets students up and moving, which I think is really important. In this example, students are asked to record what they see, what they think, and what they wonder. Can you think of any other questions you might ask a student when they're doing a museum walk? All right, a really great one is playing a game. Now, it could be something like a little basketball hoop, or some of you maybe have done the fly swatter where students run to the board and fly swat something. This is a Guess Who board that a teacher created with shapes. You could do that for history and English as well, or if you did a unit on Harry Potter, you could do a Guess Who board with Harry Potter characters. And so anytime you bring a game into any age, you're going to get people engaged. If you bring games into a classroom full of teachers, adult teachers, we're going to be engaged. All right, one of my favorite, which I've already mentioned, is using musical hooks. So many teachers and parents and organizations have created educational songs, and so these are great to play for students to get them engaged. I'm going to show you this quick example on 3D shapes.
Here are the 3D shapes that I know. A sphere, a cylinder, a cube, and a cone. A baseball, the moon, and an orange I have right here are all examples of a 3D shape that people call a sphere. A basketball, the earth, and marbles I have here are all examples of a 3D shape that people call a sphere. Here are the 3D shapes that I know. A sphere, a cylinder, a cube, and a cone. A soda.
The options for song clips and video clips are truly endless, and I really feel fortunate to be a teacher right now and to have access to that. Can you imagine teaching 20 years ago and having to roll out your VCR cart or put a CD in? It's just so easy, and there's so many resources that you have to reach out and find what you can. And I have to remind you, you're your biggest resource. If you're excited about something, the kids feed off of that. The children feed off of that. So share your excitement. Share your own personal story. For some reason, students love hearing about the personal life of their teachers. Now, I know some of you are thinking, no, we don't. We just ask you to get you off track. And that might be true, but I can't tell you how many times at the end of the school year, a student will remember something that I told them, a little tidbit about myself from the beginning of the year. And so if you have a personal story that goes along with something you're teaching, so maybe you're teaching about weather, share about the time you were in the middle of a thunderstorm, right? Just share any sort of examples that you can that are personal, and the students will feed off of that energy. Speaking of thunder. That wasn't planned. I just couldn't help myself. It's one of my daughter's favorites. And now that song's going to be in my head the rest of the day. I'll probably play it for Lincoln when I pick her up. All right, so that brings me to the last one, which is field trips or guest speakers. Field trips are a little bit more tricky to arrange, well, now during COVID, but then also at a school like ours. But I do believe in the preschool, you will usually take your children to a field trip. And guest speakers is something that we've accommodated even here at CTEC. 2 years ago, I believe the junior teaching career program, we actually had a politician come in, and he sat at the front of the room, and we told him, the teaching career students and Mr. Lucas and myself, two of the government teachers, we told him our concerns with education, and he told us what the state legislator was doing with regards to education. So having a guest speaker of any sort come in is always a really great idea. That would more so be like a hook. It might be a period long hook that would kind of lead into a lesson or lead into a topic. And really, what we're doing here is we're trying to get students excited, and we're trying to get them their buy-in. I want to show you a quick clip I found of a teacher explaining why we use the word hook, because I realized I never actually did that in this video.
Hooking your kids into learning. When we're talking about these learning hooks, we're talking about things that engage your kids into learning. But think of it when you go fishing. And I do like fishing. I don't get to do it often enough. My hubby likes it, but because we've got a toddler, it's to do it too. But anyway, when you go fishing and you've got the hook going out there are still fish sort of hovering around, looking at the hook and the bait that's on there. It depends on the bait that you've got on there, whether or not they're going to bite. The difference being, when they bite, are they going to hold on, or are they just, having a taste and then going away? Same as with our kids. Sometimes we can dangle the hook in front of them, the bait in front of them, the carrot, if you will, into what we're doing. But do they actually want to jump onto it and stick with it? Do they want to risk putting themselves out there to engage in the learning opportunity that you're providing with them? Is that bait tasty enough? So, and there are some ways that will work across the board.
So anyway, I really like the way she explained it, and I want to explain what you guys are going to be doing this week. And as she mentioned, these hooks can work across the board. What works for a preschooler may also work for a high schooler, but some of them you are going to have to tailor to your students, not just to your age group, but to the students that you learn. And so throughout the year, I might realize that a hook that works for one of my classes doesn't work for another. A smaller class might not work or might work better than a larger class. But this week, I kind of want you guys to consider different hooks for different lessons. All right, so this week's assignment is posted on Google Classroom, and it's entitled Hook Your Students. And what you're going to do is you are going to receive a learning objective and a grade level, and I want you to come up with a hook. So let's take a look at the document, and I'll kind of talk you through it. All right, at the very top of the document, it's going to give you the instructions or the directions. So for each of the following scenarios, I want you to consider a method of hooking your students in the beginning of the lesson. Consider songs, games, short stories, personal stories. I mean, really anything. What are you going to do in the beginning of the class that day to get your students excited about what they're going to be learning? If you can you link a website or a video? That way I can see it. If you can't link something though, just give me a brief explanation. So you might say, I'm going to tell a story about this one time and then give me like a brief synopsis. I just want to be able to see that you are making that connection. In case this isn't making sense, I actually did one for you. So if we look at that first box, it's U.S. History 10th grade, and the learning objective is that students will explain the events that led up to the Declaration of Independence. And so I give you two different options on what I might do as a hook and what I've done before in the past. So one of them, maybe you've had a teacher do this, you reach down and you pull up this letter and you unfold it and you read it out loud, and you read it, it's like a breakup letter. And you're kind of like, oh my gosh, who is this? And students are looking around like, who wrote this letter and dropped it on the floor? And then as the teacher, you explain, well, that brings us to the most ultimate or the most epic breakup letter of our time, the Declaration of Independence. One that I also love to use, that I'm so bummed I didn't play this year for my students, is this video clip. And it is called Too Late to Apologize. So take a listen and a viewing for yourself.
Halfway across the globe and we're standing on the ground. Screaming across the waves, you can't hear the sound. There's no fair trials, no trade, no liberties, no tea. We've colonized America, we won't stand for tyranny. Okay, and it's too late to apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late.
So I like this one. I cut it off right before the song lyrics say, we paid your foolish tax, read the acts, and it just won't do. And so it's corny, but it relates to what they're meant to learn. They're meant to understand the events that led up to the Declaration of Independence. And in this song, he references that. All right, so now here's where you're going to come up with your own hooks. The first two are science classes. So the first one is a kindergarten science lesson. The learning objective is students will record yearly weather changes, seasons, and observe patterns in the daily weather changes. And so I want you to consider what you might do to get students excited about that, what sort of hook. The next one is high school environmental science. In this learning objective, students will evaluate current practices to conserve or recover species that are currently endangered. So in this one, what can you do to get students excited or involved in learning about what is causing certain species to be endangered? All right, the next two are math classes. And remember, you're only coming up with the hook here. All right, first grade math, students will tell and write time in hours and half hours using analog and digital clocks. And then in sixth grade math, they're working with percentages. So students will calculate percentages, percent of quantity, percent of change, tax, tip, discounts, anything. All right, so the reason you only have one Edpuzzle video is because this may take you some time to complete this assignment, especially these last two. I want you to create your own. So pick any grade level, any subject. If you want to do the same grade level for both of them, that's fine. But I want you to come up with a learning objective. So consider what we talked about over the last few weeks and then come up with a hook. So maybe this is going to be, maybe one of these are going to be the ones that you're going to use for your first lesson plan that we start, or maybe it's just something you're toying with. Feel free, if you've had a teacher do something really great and you want to use that, do that. Go ahead. But I really can't wait to see what you guys come up with. I think this will be a fun assignment, and I hope maybe we can use some of these hooks when you guys are teaching to each other.